please let us know, or else, unfortunately.
It's good that you are starting this now and not before.
Exactly, and that's exactly why Gabriela and I were communicating via WhatsApp. So we've had our own channel of communication here. Let me just share. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing this, particularly if there are some people who were here for the first workshop. So anyway, greetings. My name is Alex Grech. I'm the executive director of the 3CL Foundation. John Portelli, who will be anchoring the session, is also the chair of the 3CL Foundation. The way we'll be running this is pretty much as informal as it gets. John will be anchoring the session. It will be then followed by presentations from our panelists. And then I think there's enough time for Q&As, and despite the various technical hitches we've had, we're hopeful we will get to the end of this all in one piece. If you will bear with me, and again, just for the benefit of those who don't know what the 3CL is all about, 3CL is a foundation which was set up in 2017 in Malta, and we're primarily involved in EdTech, and by EdTech we mean anything where we are looking at opportunities for putting technology for the public good. We're involved in research, we're involved in European research. We have a Horizon 2020 project which is ongoing right now. We have a particular interest in digital and media literacy, particularly the post-truth society. There's a book which is almost like an output of a conference, but almost like a movement we started in 2019 on the post-truth society, and the book is actually published today by Emerald. We're very interested in the attention economy, and we're also interested in looking at some of these complicated technologies like the blockchain and AI, and investigating how they can empower people, specifically learners. We are always on the side of the learners as opposed to being on the side of the institutions. This is something I think which is, again, close to my heart and close to John's heart. There was always a bit of an activist bent to the foundation when it was set up. We're running a lot of projects. We have affiliations with the Commonwealth of Learning, and again, this is one of those workshops where we are co-hosting this with the Commonwealth of Learning in Vancouver, who are our partners, and we have run many such workshops and webinars, and we'll continue to do that. We're also COL's regional representative for Sub-Saharan Africa. We currently operate from the island of Malta, so very close to Libya on one side, very close to Sicily on the other side. We're involved in some of these more technical EU projects, and we have a memorandum of understanding with the ILO, and we're really looking at projects in Africa and developing countries right now with particular emphasis on emerging technologies and skill sets. And then we're also into capacity building. Malta's a micro state. There's a lot that can be learned from the experiences of small states that can be used almost like island labs, when you can try out new things within the complexities, both from geography, geopolitical stuff, I guess, that you wouldn't enjoy in other countries. So again, Malta has had a tradition of technologies being tested out here before they were tested out in other countries. And we continue to use that as an excuse to try and do things which can be started up in one place and have resonance in another place. If you're looking at social justice and education, again, John and I and other people within the foundation have a passion for refugees, education and technology, gender issues. So that's really where we are right now. And I think I'll leave this thing about open education, whatever that means. It also means that webinars like this will eventually find a way on platforms where this type of content can be shared as a public good. And that includes even, the GIZ platform, for example, Atingi, which is literally looking at sharing content for free with people in Africa. I think that's all I have to share with you right now. So my suggestion is that John now takes over. I will stop sharing my slides, and it's over to John from this point onwards.
Thank you very much, Alex, and welcome all to the second webinar in a series of 3 webinars organized by the 3CL in collaboration with COL. I am a professor emeritus from the University of Toronto, where I have taught at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies of Education, in the Department of Social Justice Education. I am originally from Malta. I left Malta to Canada almost 44 years ago, and I am currently in Malta. So welcome to all of you. I can see from the chat, we have people from Trinidad and Tobago, Kenya, Rwanda, and many other places. Welcome to all. I would like to thank Alex for all the work he does and all the other people behind the scenes, including Ms. Gabriela Cassola, and of course, the cooperative work with COL. The purpose of these 3 webinars, we had one last week, one today, and the third one on Monday, is to create a meaningful conversation among international scholars and activists in education, with a focus on social justice education and its implications for education in the post-COVID-19 era, and particularly with reference to the African continent and the Middle East. All the participants that we have invited, both for today and the ones from last week and the ones for the following week, adhere to a robust understanding of social justice education in line with critical pedagogy, anti-oppressive education, and decolonial and/or anti-colonial educational perspectives. And we say this upfront without any apologies. They have been invited to reflect on the topic at hand, with particular reference to teaching online, which has, especially in the last 18 months, become the norm and most probably will continue to be so for a while. I welcome the 3 panelists for today, Professor Njoki Wan, Professor Khalid Arar, and Dr. Francois Mifsud. I will introduce each of them before each of them will talk. Professor Njoki Wan at the moment is in Toronto, and unfortunately, where she lives, she has been experiencing power cuts, but hopefully we managed to connect her via phone. Professor Khalid Arar is in Palestine, and he will be talking from there, and Dr. Francois Mifsud is in Malta. Now, something a bit of a specific background to the session today. The session today is on social justice and educational leadership. Last week, we had a session on the reconsideration of social justice education. Social justice education is a contested concept. Yet, it is crucial from our perspective to work with a robust notion of social justice that goes beyond a soft British and Anglo-Saxon North American understanding of social justice. A robust notion of social justice is consistent with anti-oppressive education and the anti-colonial project. Today, we have not just social justice, but also educational leadership, which is yet another equally contested concept. The literature on educational leadership is enormous, and there are many and differing understandings of leadership. And yet, it is very crucial, therefore, to ask what understanding of leadership is consistent with a robust notion of social justice. Just as not anything we wish amounts to social justice, likewise, not anything we wish in leadership is consistent with social justice. If we truly believe in a genuine, meaningful, and robust notion of social justice, we have to make sure that our understanding and the practices that flow from our understanding of leadership are indeed consistent with social justice. Needless to say, leadership and issues of power go hand in hand. Leadership is not a neutral concept. In the core of leadership is a relationship between those who are giving some sense of direction and the rest, and therefore there is a relationship of power. Power is not always negative. And the question for us becomes, what are those forms of educational leadership that promote positive power relationships rather than abusive relationships, and hence are consistent with a robust social justice project? To guide our panelists, besides the brief description which I have shared with you, we also gave them 3 guiding questions for the discussion. And these questions are as follows. 1, what about the roles of those in educational leadership given a robust social justice education? What conceptions of leadership are more consistent with a social justice perspective? And thirdly, what recommendations may each of you have as we continue to develop a leadership understanding and practices that are consistent with social justice? Keeping in mind, of course, your own areas of research and the contexts in which you work. The first speaker on the panel, and each speaker will have 15 minutes, 5 minutes prior to the 15 minutes, I will advise each speaker that they have 5 minutes left. Following that, we may have some conversation among ourselves before we open up to the audience. And of course, we encourage the audience to freely write on the chat, and then we will take those comments or questions, remarks into account in the ensuing discussion following the speakers. Professor Wen, are you there? Hello?
Yes, I'm here. I am here.
Good. So,
Can people
very
hear
glad
me?
I can hear, we can hear you very well, or at least I can hear you very well. I am assuming the rest as well. So, welcome, Professor Wen. A brief introduction. Professor Wen is a very good colleague of mine for the last 23 years since I have been teaching at OISE of the University of Toronto. She is a full professor, and currently she is the chair of the Social Justice Education Department, to which I belong. She has also been an advisor on gender issues with the President's Office at the University of Toronto. She is an expert in feminist Black studies, spirituality and education, and Indigenous education. She has led many research projects in Canada, in the province of Ontario, but also in the African continent, including Kenya, her native home. Like me, she came to Canada in the late 70s, where she has studied and continued to teach, but she never forgot her roots, and she is constantly working as an activist, as an educator with Kenya. She has published widely internationally, books, articles, presentations. You can go on her webpage and you can review all her academic record. However, besides her academic work and besides her activist work, more recently, she has also engaged in literary work. Primarily, her memoir entitled From My Mother's Back. I urge you all to buy and read this very wonderful reflective book, where Professor Wayne takes a look at her own childhood living in Kenya, where her parents owned a small coffee farm. This literary memoir explores her African identity and how her upbringing and close relationship with her mother fostered her a sense of self as a Black woman. Professor Wen, it is a great pleasure to introduce you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Portelli, for that great introduction. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Most welcome.
Today, yeah, so can I begin?
Yes, please.
So today what I did, I prepared my presentation to reflect on the 3 questions, and the title of my presentation is Social Justice Education Leadership as If It Matters. I start with the 2 quotes. One quote is leadership leadership is not about managing things, but developing people. And the second one is inner leadership precedes outer leadership. When I talk about leadership, it's not about developing things, but developing people. I am saying anything we do with leadership and social justice, we have to focus on people, their talents, their inborn gifts. And then the person who has been given the responsibility to be the leader of a group or to be part of the educational system as a leader, he or she cannot lead if they are not leaders of themselves. They have to develop their own leadership to be able to be leaders of other people. My outline today, I want to start by reflecting on COVID-19 and the social unrest, and then I'll look at leadership in general, then I'll focus on social justice leadership, and then I'll go and send a bit of my arguments in terms of what is good leadership, and then I have the recommendations as concluding facts. COVID-19 and social unrest. The last 15 years have been months of awakening. When we heard about COVID-19 starting from China, we thought, wow, that will come and pass, like the SARS and all those kinds of viruses that have come about in the last 5 years or 10 years. But then by the beginning of 2020, it became very, very clear that this was not just another virus that will come and pass. It's a virus that is affecting the whole world. And I do remember by March, we had been given orders to leave our offices and start working from our houses and transferring teaching online, things that people had not experienced. I will go back and forth between Canada and Kenya. So initially, going and teaching online and the COVID-19, we said, oh my goodness, this virus is reveling everybody regardless of class, color, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. However, it was very clear, despite the fact that people are celebrating in terms of celebration in quotes, that the birds are coming back, that the air is a little bit better because the planes are not flying, that the animals that used to have disappeared, especially little insects, are now back and so on and so forth. It became clear that things were not what we thought they were, because soon after, when people getting admitted to hospitals, it was very clear the people who are dying were racialized people from a Canadian perspective. If I go, switch back to the continent and especially Kenya that I'm familiar with, it was very, very clear that the students who had been sent home could not have access to education because they did not have laptops, they did not have electricity. Teachers could only use their own phones, and they did not have enough data to even conduct classes. So education somehow in Africa came to a standstill, while in North America, it continued through internet, through online, despite the many, many challenges that issues of class and poverty were clear. And then June, with the death of George Floyd, something else erupted, the social and awakening of the historical inequities that have existed for a very, very long time. And this was just to take up the social unrest that we have witnessed within Middle East. And the people started saying all lives matters. It's not just one kind of life that matters, all lives matters. And it became a global movement, people challenging the status quo, people saying something has to be done. Now, coming back specifically to leadership in general, I think this in particular became an awakening for us because leadership we could not continue, our role as leaders, the normal way that we have had leadership in schools. Just before I go to the notion of leadership in schools, I would like I know the people on the Zoom, my colleagues, they know about leadership, just to remind ourselves, and Professor Portelli did mention that leadership is the ability of humans to relate deeply to each other. So if we cannot relate deeply to each other, if we cannot look at each other's eyes and say, I see you, then we cannot be leaders. So leadership has to pay attention to the souls, to the physicality of people. And then when it comes to ideas, you don't, as a leader, you don't keep ideas to yourself, you share ideas. And then you're sharing responsibility so that you don't become a dictator leader. And then you have to constantly reflect about the people you are, you are the head of a department or you are a teacher and so on and so forth, and the power relations that you evoke when you are in that position. And also, when we talk about leadership, it's not about the self. You really have to know about the people who are below you. And it has to be a horizontal kind of conversations that you have. Because what leadership is a social influence process in which the leader seeks to voluntarily participate in the development of the people he or she is in charge of. And also you have to remember that when we are talking about leadership, we have to pay attention to the cultural orientation and the traditions and beliefs of the people who are part of the organization you are in. And also when we are talking about leadership, we are talking about combining leadership in terms of strategy and character. When we talk about leadership, we have to think of why leadership? Why do we have theories of leadership? Because theories of leadership helps us to understand and to interpret the actions of leaders. It also theories of leadership enables us, and there are many, which I will not go into that, helps us to provide a lens to view and make sense of the ways in which leadership is enacted in a place of work. And it's like theories of leadership provides a sort of a roadmap, a guide into what is going to be done. In terms of, can every one of us be a social justice leader? Yes, everybody can, if you make a conscious effort. because what it means is that when you have made a conscious effort to be a social justice leader, it means that you have made a positive influence of the people, and that you're conveying clearly a shared vision of the organization you are part of. And the people should resonate. The people should resonate with the vision, and they should see themselves in that vision. So social justice leadership should cultivate and guide and teach and learn and unlearn, enable people to look at their past and say, you know, in the past 100 years, 200 years, this is the way leadership has been in these organizations. But based on the awakening of the COVID-19 and the social unrest, it's important for us to start unlearning and putting our selfishness aside. And also we should pay attention to the words we use as when we're using social leadership model. In terms of when we talk about liberty, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? Are we talking about ideological liberty? Are we talking about an ideal of liberty, or are we actually looking at the meaning of liberty and what it means to set people free mentally, socially, and physically? Especially mental enslavement is the one that we really, really need to pay attention to. And then social justice leadership, you have to be patient. You have to be patience is very, very important when we are using social leadership model. Now, let's look at the roles of educational leadership roles. They facilitate the cultivation of critical thinking skills. And when I talk about critical thinking skills, it's something that critical thinking skills has been thrown around. Oh, we have to do critical thinking in this, we have to do this. But you really have to analyze critical. What does it mean? Thinking, what does it mean? Skills, what does it mean? So that it doesn't become a romanticized statement of critical thinking skills. You really have to cultivate within yourself and your employees so that when you put ideas, when you're making decisions, every aspect has to be taken into consideration. With education leadership roles, you have to cultivate high morality, because I think we have seen, even within the COVID, the morale has been really, really low, and the morality of the people have been very, very, very low. So how do we cultivate high morality within people so that when, and I'll say this, so that when, for instance, we are distributing the vaccines, we don't distribute vaccines that are outdated, that we know they are no longer valid to the continent of Africa, and reject those human beings with vaccines that we know they are not effective. We really have to have a moral conscience when we are doing that. We have to have a moral conscience of doing that. So again, I'll still go back to the awakening of COVID-19 and the social unrest and what it should have taught us, and not just to take business as usual. If I can continue with the roles, it's the educational leadership roles enables us to for clarity of understanding of shared insights, and also to have meaningful conversations with the people that you as a leader, social justice leader, has to be in charge of. And then being conscious of the personal growth of your employees and recognizing that diversity of employees is crucial, not for the sake of saying, oh, I have two, especially in North America, when you have one or two people who look different, who speak with a different accent, you think you have achieved diversity. We have to pay attention to the diversity of ideas. We have to pay attention, yes, to the ethnicity, to gender, and so on and so forth. So we have to start evaluating the meaningfulness when we talk about notions of diversity. It's not just the physicalities, but also ideally the ideals of social justice. And then if I can, yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. Just to let you know, you have about 5 minutes left, more or less. Okay.
That's good.
That's okay.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you. Please.
Yeah. And then we also have to look at it in terms of the impact of this type of leadership. What will happen is you will likely increase the quality of the decisions that you make within the organization. You contribute the quality of employees' work, the schools, and so on and so forth. And you'll be able to motivate. You know, I talked about the high morality. You'll be able to motivate your employees and actually start discovering the talents that they have. And then in terms of, spirituality, not spirituality, coming now to the roles of school leaders. We go back to the COVID-19 and the social unrest, and we have to start looking at it. How have the schools been impacted by those two big monsters that have confronted us in the last 15 months? And then start paying attention. What will be the impact? What will be the impact of? What will be the learning income? What will be the learning outcome of the students? And also, paying attention to the impact on how the teachers, the students, the parents, and staff see the school itself, not as a school for haves and have-nots, but as a space where you can go in and be empowered. In other words, empowering the teachers and contributing to the school improvement because of the shared leadership. And also you find that, and I've talked about that, the notion of recognizing recognizing the diversity within the schools. In conclusion, I have much, much more, but in conclusion is that the recommendation that I will have is for the school leaders or for all the leaders to have a moment to have a reflection on the awakening that has happened through COVID-19 and the social unrest. We cannot run our schools, our organizations as business as usual. We have to pay attention to the masking of the inequities within the world and ask ourselves, how do we participate in learning and unlearning? And then the other thing is we cannot, as leaders, we cannot sit and watch our schools be run as usual, business as usual. It is time for change. And when we talk about change, it's not just a conversational change. It's change that is touchable. It's change that can be felt. It's change that can be seen. It's change that people 10, 20, 30 years to come will say, whoa, the 2020, 2021 changed our lives, and this is what has happened. I'll leave you with that and say thank you for the opportunity, Professor Portelli, to participate in this conversation.
Thank you very much, Professor Wan. Please do remain with us, because we will have the conversation at the end with the audience and so on, okay? So thank you for reminding us the need to focus on people rather than objects and bureaucracies when we deal with leadership. At the core of leadership, you very clearly pointed out the importance of deep relationships. You also noted how the context of COVID and Black Lives Matters, the global movement, have led us, if we are sincere to ourselves, an awakening towards the abuses we have committed towards the natural world, but also, in some sense, abuses, violence, if you will, to the structures of schools and leadership. And we need, as you said, passionately be open to change that we truly feel with a strong moral conscience, taking into account the traditions of people, the voices of the people, so that all of us indeed can be involved in the social justice project. I welcome also other people from other parts of the world. I see here on the chat, we have now, besides the ones I mentioned earlier, people from Belize, Jamaica, Canada, Botswana, South Africa. Welcome to all of you again. I now move to introduce my other colleague and friend, Professor Khalid Arar. Professor Khalid Arar is a professor, currently full professor of educational leadership and policy at the School of Improvement at the doctoral program at the College of Education at Texas State University. He is currently in Palestine, and he was until recently president of a Palestinian higher education college in Israel, and where I had the pleasure to work with him for a week when he kindly invited me to assist in some work there. And I will never forget his generosity and the engaging conversations I had with him, with the students and his colleagues. He's also an associate editor of a first-class journal entitled International Journal of Leadership in Education. For the past 2 decades, he has conducted studies, and I mean many studies, in the Middle East, Europe, and North America on issues relating to equity, diversity, and social justice, from the kindergarten to 12, but also higher education. And he has also, as a leading international scholar on educational leadership, he has also published on leadership and the immigrant life or the immigrant condition. He is also a true, genuine practitioner, and I vouch also an excellent administrator that truly opens up possibilities for his colleagues and students. Professor Arar, your turn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, for this prolonged introduction. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to thank you, John, my friend, for inviting me to this webinar. And I'll put in front the title of my presentation. So this presentation is an open invitation to educational leadership researchers and school leaders and practitioners, educators all around the world to think about the beyond of social justice leadership. And I tap on 3 global, recent global phenomena. One is the global immigration phenomena, and the other one is the Black Lives Matter, or All Lives Matter, as I like to call it, phenomena. And the third one is the COVID era. And we know that some researchers are using the term social justice, but this term sometimes seems not inviting. So also know that the term is even prohibited in certain parts of the world. But our response here is that we must travel through the many meanings of social justice to the beyond spaces where social justice, or whatever it's called, allows for active intellectual debates over the many injustices around the world. And in this sense, we cannot keep a blind eye to the majority of educators, researchers, practitioners, and policymakers who have ignored problems of inequalities, inequities, indignities, exclusions, as well as injustices. Well, I want to emphasize here that social justice starts at home, and it cannot be selective, or it cannot go with nice choices or selective reactions. Social justice is both a means and ends. So before I move to reconceptualize the beyond social justice in terms of school communities, towns, villages, cities, states around the world. And I do tab here in different literature synthesis that I published, which one was the main, where trying to make a distinctive understanding of the binary of social justice theory relating to developed and developed societies. And the other theoretical analysis was in gaining more understanding of diversity and equity, while we're looking to different cultural differences. But before I dig into that, I want to present my ontology and epistemology. Why researching social justice? Why trying to deepen the understanding of social justice? Why I, as a scholar, have been looking into the vulnerable. So as John presented me, I'm a fourth generation exiled Palestinian family after the demolition of family home in 1956 by the Israeli state. Then we entered different forces of immigration, disappearing over various geographies areas. Some found place in Palestine, some found places beyond the borders of the new established states, which ruins our home. Some moved to the West Bank and other become refugees outside Palestine. So with this trauma is a part of my narrative. It's about a part of my lens, and it's a part of my growth and development. So this is where I can see and I can deal with moral dilemmas and social injustices while reinforced sensitivity towards the other. And we have witnessed the recent escalations and dispute in Israel, in Sheikh Jarrah and Al-Aqsa, while three parts of my nations, one is under constant occupation, the other one is jailed in one of the biggest ghettos in the world, and the third one is, a citizen under apartheid regime. So with this understanding, with this epistemological understanding, I want to move towards the reconstructing of social injustices. And I use the preposition beyond, which intend to clarify how the struggle for leadership for social justice are different historically, culturally, and nationally. And in the beyond spaces, I'm not advocating for any single definition of social justice, any single ontological justification, or any single political pathways toward achieving social justice. By then, well, I'm not trying to impose any terms as different Western Anglophonic scholars has been trying to do, to put and formulate the regime of truth in terms of social justice, both in the academic arenas, in the academic publications, etc. But I'd like to invite readers to reflect on their familiarity or unfamiliarity with this term. And of course, as I both synthesize and review the literature in the recent published papers out the Scholarship of Social Justice and Educational Leadership and Policy for Refugees, I want to extract a number of lessons learned, while at the time catch readers up on the diverse trajectories on this important topic. For this, it should be understood that social justice is first a political discourse. Secondly, it's action intervention that seek to expand people opportunities and results in closing disparities between oppressed people of the world and thus who have been advantaged circumstances alone. And thirdly, there is a counter narrative. Social justice is a counter narrative. It's a decolonization narrative, and it's a political discourse affects alternatives politically and economically. So as encounter an alternative narrative, social justice are positions in opposition to dominant discourses scaffolded by academic disciplines, especially in science and technology. And this was also more vivid in the COVID area. So explicit naming of problems and issues is a good first step in any analysis. Therefore, among the group in oppressed categories are refugees, asylum seekers, ethnic and religious minorities, women and girls, Black and brown people, indigenous populations, including the Native Americans, Palestinians, Chicanos, and other Spanish-speaking American, lesbian communities, Muslims, Asians, the elderly, working class people, and physical and mentally disabled individuals. For interpretation of social justice mean that the access, the equitable access of these communities on the beyond spaces is crucially important when we examine both policy, leadership, and praxis. So I want to introduce also that we are trying our best to clarify the beyond spaces by putting also who we are and what we seek to arrive for. And we move to the beyond spaces of social justice, where reflexive dialogues and speech acts bring us closer to understand of how system structures, policies seek to make all of us complicit in perpetuating exclusion, indignities, and equities. For unless we engaged in the political education ourselves, the system. So if I go, for example, for the Palestinians here in Israel, they are not engaged in policy formulation. They are not engaged in deciding their policy for education. So throughout their education, they are colonialized. So we cannot speak about, the Black and brown people from a privileged stance. We need to share with them. We need to make, a space for them to present themselves. When I analyze the research about refugees, so it was the Anglophonic voices has been heard. It's not the refugees' voices that been heard throughout this research. And when we look into publications, they are coming from a privileged houses and they are coming from a privileged universities. So this privilege has been speaking instead of the refugees. And this is true for other social socially underprivileged. So there is a great cost of share a burden when we speak about social justice and and as representation and redistribution. So there is a burden and there is a price that we need to pay in this sense. So for us
Professor
as educators, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. You have about 5 minutes left. Thank you.
Good. So thank you. So I will try to move with these 5 minutes towards conclusions. So with that being said, social justice purports 6 barriers and for the implementation of social justice in education. The first one, textual and responsiveness to social justice issues. Well, I use here Wittgenstein's terms, discourse create reality. So it starts from text. It starts from naming things. It starts from giving these different communities to participate in defining these terms and defining the discourse of social injustice. So this is one. So the representation is here. The other is school leaders being agents of organizational conservativeness. So, and social science methods erasing objectivities and diminishing moral choices, and aversion to emotionally and other non-rational factors in decision making. So all the data-driven decision making, all the high stakes, all the industrial revolution terms of that dictates the system, things like standards, to meet, etc. So emotions are not there, and of course, troubling legacy of national leadership standards and a fail of historical dominant by anti-intellectualism. Thus, critical reflexivity of the leaders on themselves and the context that they work on creating inclusive and caring schools throughout teacher empowerment, community and students engagement, especially when the context dealing with deprived, wounded, and unprivileged students suffering from economic deprivation, trauma, and lose, and possible ended harmful life experience. So we assume that there is a greater awareness of education researchers to education and leadership and policy for deprived population in recent years. But when we examine this discourse deeply, and when we examine this scholarship deeply, we see that there is overrepresentation of Anglophonic of only 8 to 10% people that decides and formulate this discourse towards the others, while other communities of underprivileged are not presented within this discourse. And the impact of social media and other media outlets may have led to the researchers to be more vocal regarding the field of educational leadership. So social justice policy development is mainly Anglophonic, while the less developed world is not participating in generating this Anglo lingua franca discourse and scholarship towards the underprivileged. So this raises questions about the validity of methodology. We need to re-examine our methodology. We need to re-examine our epistemologies, and we need to re-examine the epistemologies of the scholars that writing about social justice. John and other, I can tell you that some scholars living in settlements, occupying others, and they still write and publish about social justice, and they still speaks about social justice. Some scholars speaks about whiteness, while they still practice social injustices back home. So gender inequality and other issues of intercultural dialogue are more important to open this space of power relation in the school, feminism, colonialism, challenges of integration, and issues issues alike are a part of the normalization of knowledge, which far from touching the surface of system deep oppression. So it starts from discourse, it goes to deliberating a dialogue, while representation is an issue, redistribution also is an issue, and reflective and reflexive education and cultural responsive education is another issue where communities need to be part of this discourse in order to allow for more voices, in order to allow for diversity, both in creating the discourse, promoting the dialogue and the process within our education systems, and to allow for diversity. So thank you very much once again for this opportunity. And of course, questions, comments are very welcome. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Professor Arar. I truly appreciate your passion, and at the same time, developing a very strong argument, as you yourself are have noted. It's not only simply a matter of rationality, but also a matter of emotions that need to be combined. And you are making that point not only theoretically, but also, I think, practically. Like, I think, Professor Wan, in your own way, you are reminding us of the need to be indeed radical. In other words, to go back to the roots. And in your case, go beyond the normalization of Western white understandings of social justice that in many ways have led to unfortunate contradictions and exclusions. However, you also give us a positive way forward through analyzing the discourse, through dialogue, representation, redistribution, reflexive education involving communities, and truly multiple voices. I cannot but share a quote that I recalled while you were presenting, a quote from the famous Edward Said. I don't need to tell you about Edward Said, of course, you know Said's work much better than I do, but a famous quote from him where he says, every representation is in some sense a misrepresentation. And in a way, you are warning us that this reflexive element of looking at representations and how they are interpreted in practice needs to continue to be revisited. Thank you. With that, I move forward to introduce Dr. Francois Mifsud. Francois, are you there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you
hear
me?
Wonderful. Yes, I can.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce the third and last speaker on the panel, Dr. Francois Mifsud, who I have known for now over 15 years, a colleague and friend from Malta, and who completed his undergraduate studies in philosophy and social anthropology in Malta, and then also holds degrees in theology from Bologna, a master's in social justice from the University of London, and a PhD in philosophy of education from OISI. No secret, I happen to have been his supervisor, and it was a pleasure to, within quote, supervise Francois. Most probably I learned more from him than he learned from me. And his thesis was a brilliant work on hospitality and education, analyzing epistemologically and politically a case study of the post-Holocaust context. His research focuses on questions of social justice, diversity, multiculturalism, multi-faith, inclusion, and educational possibilities. He is currently a lecturer in the Department of Inclusion and Access to Learning at the Faculty of Education, University of Malta. Like the two previous scholars, Francois is also an activist in his own right here in Malta and elsewhere. Francois, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The title of my presentation, as you can see, is Anarchic Leadership for Wonderful Education. So the term leadership is a term that I have to admit that makes me very uncomfortable, that obviously that puts me in a situation when I'm really worried about what do we mean by leadership. We know that in the history of humanity, we heard the leadership all the time. And we know also that leadership can carry lots of ethical and political issues behind it. So one thing that I'm reflecting on is how to put some sort of a value on leadership that kind of puts in line the educational aspect and the social justice aspect. So we need a form of leadership that includes both social justice and education. What I'm trying, actually my presentation is very much in continuity with what the previous professors spoke about, both the fact that the question of representativism, which is very problematic, and also within the question of when we speak of being in relationship with the context, with the people, okay? So let's do just a little bit of brainstorming. What is the event? What is the happening that lead to a learning experience? There is a happening. In all the learning experience that we experience as a human beings, there is something which is practically general and present within all the learning experience. And by learning, I mean learning algebra, I mean learning a new language, learning philosophy, learning social skills, learning about people, learning about cultures. So there is something, there is an event without which there is no pedagogy, without which there is no education. And this event is very simple. It's an encounter with the new, an encounter with the other, an encounter with a reality that is beyond you. And this encounter can be very traumatic. Look at the children when they go the first time to school, and when they are still kids, 4 years old, 3 years old. It is traumatic. Many of them cry. Why? Because they are going beyond their family, beyond their known, beyond their cuckoo, and they end up in a new reality, in a new environment. They are meeting with the other. And that other, obviously, it is essential in the learning experience, but at the same time can be very frightening. Okay? So, why wonder? Wonder is an experience that only I can experience, only the self can experience. No one can wonder for me. And practically, if you follow this small picture that I put here, the self-other encounter, the encounter with the new, that event that eventually, hopefully, will lead to education, needs to pass through a process. Without that process, there is no pedagogy, there is no education. Okay? The self-other encounter can lead to conflict, can lead to anger, can lead to frustration, can lead to joy. But what is the quality of that self-other encounter that would lead to an educational experience? And I would say the key is wonder. Wonder. What is wonder when we speak of wonder? Wonder is the initial reaction of the self when encountering with newness. Okay? I'm sure all of us have experienced that. Wondering how a new mobile phone, a new cell phone works, functions. Wondering about seeing something in nature, about how a tree grew. Wondering about sex, sexuality, wondering about different cultures, different faiths, okay? Wondering, but is an experience that no one can give me. It's something that I have to develop through this encounter with the newness, okay? So when we speak of newness, back again, please, I want to be clear here. Newness is practically the experience that goes beyond the immediate conceptual reach of the subject. This is experiencing the newness of the other. That is, newness is practically everything that is not me. Okay, everything that is not me. It can be another person, it can be a topic, it can be something out there, it can be an event, experiencing an earthquake, that is a newness experience. It can be a tragic experience, it can be a happy experience, okay? So wonder is practically this pivotal moment through which the experience of the newness, the encounter with the new, the encounter with the other, in one way or another becomes a learning experience, becomes a learning experience, So here we have a problem, okay? The deal is very clear. No one can wonder for me. It is I who wonders. It is the self who wonders. But at the same time, we live in an educational system where practically we are like this, as Paulo Freire would call it, this bank, where the system, where the institutions are all the time depositing information. Deposit information without giving us the space to wonder, without giving us the space to explore, without giving us the space also to be transformed by that wonder that we experience. Okay, so now here, back to the concept of wonder. Okay, so wonder practically merges these two realities. On the one hand, there is an experience of being overwhelmed. Okay, when I'm wondering, I'm encountering something that is beyond me, beyond my concepts, beyond my knowledge. On the other hand, but there is also that interest, that's something that kind of motivates me, that moves me to ask. Okay, wonder is always accompanied by its best friend, that is the question mark. Okay, so wonder is this immersion of these two reality. On the one hand, being overwhelmed, on the other hand, being interested. If I'm only overwhelmed, I will drop out. Okay, when things are just overwhelming, usually people drop out. And this happens a lot in the educational system, where people are feeling overwhelmed, but they are not interested. What happens? They drop out. Okay, and this is something that we are seeing all the time, even in our educational system in Europe. Okay, we are seeing it with migrants. Okay, when they are being overwhelmed, burdened, okay, with all these kind of integration strategies, with citizenship education, which I find it really awful, because although, for example, the EU is all the time promoting citizenship educations, okay, to migrants, at the same time doesn't give any citizenship. Only places like Malta, Austria, where if you are rich, if you have a fat pocket, then they will give you the citizenship, but it has nothing to do with education. Okay, so citizenship education for me, it's almost like adding insult to injury. No, it's like showing the carrot, but never giving the carrot. So it's telling them, you learn about how to be a good citizen, when even that in itself is very problematic, because you're assuming that these people were not good citizens. And many people migrated because they are good citizens, okay? And then when they come to your country, tell them all about how to be a good citizen, but never give them the rights of being a full citizen, okay? So wonder is a merging experience with being overwhelmed. It is being overwhelmed, okay? When you encounter the new about yourself, about other people, about any event, about any situation, you are overwhelmed. That comes with wonder. But on the other hand, there is that interest. Okay, there is something that motivates you to ask and to go deeper in what you're wondering. Okay, so this is the dilemma that we encounter in our educational system. Okay, and maybe it's a dilemma that went even deeper through this COVID situation. On the one hand, there is the institution, that the main interest of the institution is always to perpetuate social structures and ideology. On the other hand, there is this kind of space for wonder, where students would love to explore and also would love to let themselves being transformed by what they are exploring. Okay, so on the one hand, we see the banking model, what Paulo Freire calls the banking model. On the other hand, we see the problematic aspect, where students are problematizing things, are questioning. Okay, so how can we move towards the explorative and transformative education? How can we move towards a more wonderful education? And here I think the educators need to assume a leadership role. But I'm being very careful here. What sort of leadership? And the sort of leadership, in my view, that can lead towards the explorative and transformative pedagogy, education, is an anarchic leadership. What do I mean by anarchic? First of all, anarchic, I'm not intending to mean being without the law, being without structures, being without the institutions. That is not the case. But especially from the educational historical experience, anarchic pedagogy, anarchic education is when education reflects first bottoms up instead of top down. Okay, it starts from the context. It starts from the experience of the students. We see this, for example, in Ferrer in Spain. We see this, for example, in Paulo Freire in Brazil. We see this also in Don Lorenzo Minali in Italy, where he starts his school in Barbiana in the middle of nowhere. We see this also with Maria Montessori, with her daring way of practically focusing her pedagogy on, first and foremost, on observation, instead of just being there and subjecting her students to the institution.
Dr. Mifsud, sorry to interrupt you. 5 minutes.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's great.
Sorry.
So practically what I'm saying is this. If we need an educational leadership that is truly education and that is also social justice, we definitely would need an anarchic leadership. That is a leadership that is ready to hold back the institutions and allow our students, allow our learners to explore, to wander, and give them the space for that, okay? And you see this a lot in teachers, okay? And John Portelli loves to speak about ethics of subversion. When teachers know that the system that they are swimming in, practically, that they are fully immersed in, okay, is not helping the students. And you see these teachers practically intervening, entering between the system and the students to protect the students, to allow the students to learn, okay? So what do we need in a post-COVID reality? Maybe it's not yet post-COVID, hopefully one day will be post-COVID. Definitely would need more anarchic leadership for education to be in tune with a just education, for an education to be a social justice education. That is an education that truly listens to the needs of our students on the one hand, and also that gives space for our students to wander, to explore, so that they can be transformed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francois. Once again, very much in line with the two previous speakers. You are reminding us of the traditional dangers of leadership or of a leader. I think we need to distinguish between the notion of one charismatic leader and leadership. Leadership in itself is more communal. And you are taking us back to the core of leadership, the encounter. And you analyze phenomenologically, if you will, what happens in the encounter through wandering. And once again, using the word from Professor Wan, we have an awakening. And an awakening that through COVID makes us understand the contradictions between the rigidity of the institutions that reproduce, and on the other hand, the need to explore and wonder that students keep on thirsting for. And if I may put a 2 cents for 3CL, 3CL, we believe in connected learning, and connected learning gets into exactly the core of what Dr. Mifsud is saying. We need to go beyond the restrictions of the structures. We need to go beyond social justice, as Professor Arar put it, of representing the West. And as Professor Wan reminded us, we need to have this genuine awakening that brings out the needed changes. So there are questions the audience, the participants can write both in the question and answer section, as well as in the chat. I'm going to start from the question and answer. So, dear colleagues, what I'm going to do is read about 4 or 5. Please try to make some note, and then in the 15 minutes remaining, I will give you some time to comment on one or any of these comments or questions that I would have read. Professor Wan, you are still with us?
Yes,
Hello?
I am.
Okay, good.
I am.
Thank you. So, someone, Dinesh Arja, wrote, "What is social justice as women?" Maybe, Joki, you want to address a bit this, but even the other one. So that is one. Someone else wrote, Jean, sorry, a part of availability of devices, laptops, smartphones, and so on, internet connectivity and electricity. What do you say and discuss about digital literacy skills for the leaders?
Okay.
That is another question. A third question from Anu is, how different is social justice education from anti-racist education? Huge question. We could spend the whole term, but the question is being asked. Okay. Someone wrote, anonymous attendee, social justice as physical challenging person. A very important perspective in social justice as well. Onuh writes, a group is defined in terms of those who identify themselves as members of the group. This is a quote from Grech. In today's world scenario, are we at the verge of composing and adopting a, quote, global anthem, end of quote, to replace, quote, national anthems as an ostrom for fading out nationalistic tendencies that breed social injustice within and between countries? If so, how could this be initiated? Another huge question. Maybe the participants can comment on this as well, but also Onuh, our third and final session in the series is on activism, and I believe this is something that they will address. Steve wrote, how are educational leaders chosen for primary and secondary schools in Kenya, Palestine, Canada, and the US? What is the culture of educational leadership? Okay, so we have more than 4 questions here. We have 6 or 7. There are more questions in the chat, but I'm going to stop here for now to give the panelists a few minutes each. Try to be considerate, let's say 2 minutes each, and then hopefully I will go over some of the comments on the chat. Thank you. Joki, you want to start?
Yeah, I can
Thank you.
talk about the social justice in relation to women. What I would say is the way we can address social justice as women is to find ways of empowerment. And empowerment comes in different forms. In many places, you find that because of globalization and the universalization of one development model fits all, there has been a lot of poverty that has been created. There have been a lot of pushback in terms of the contributions of women in the national development of their countries. And my research has showed me that the only way to address issues of social justice is to empower women, and I'll say number 1, economic empowerment, so that they're not constantly having an extended hand, either to look for handouts from their spouses or their parents, or from their government. So economic empowerment. And when I talk about economic empowerment, what I mean here is we do know that, especially I'm talking about looking at the way education, the colonial education was structured and has been structured in Kenya I'll confidently say that that education failed us. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have an education to have the economic empowerment. It's to look at your surroundings and ask yourself, we have what you call juakali. Juakali are cottage industries. What can you engage in that you can add its value as a woman and start selling it? We have a lot of well-to-do women who sell in markets, women who have very creative ways of making money. So economic empowerment is very, very important. The second one is spiritual empowerment. With the colonization, there was the introduction of spiritual poverty. So knowing yourself, knowing your connectedness with your soul and the people surrounding you is another very, very important aspect of social justice for women. And lastly is having a voice, and having a voice as a woman, not to have a contested or an argument or a confrontation kind of a voice, but having a voice to state your issues, having a voice and a representative from the grassroots to the parliament. So having a political voice, having a social voice, having a personal voice is one way to ensure that women do have, has part and parcel of the social justice ideology. This is said with the notion that this cannot be achieved overnight. It's a question of cultivating over time. Do you want me to talk about any other question, or I leave it to the other?
Let me, I will soon pass over to Khalid and to Francois. There is another comment made, Joki, and given your work with the African continent, of course, keeping in mind the African continent is very diverse, but Steve Kumayo made this comment. In Africa, the provision of socially just spaces appears to be a dream because of selfish political leadership. I know this is a huge topic, at least from the work I have done with Nigeria, but tell us, any brief comment on this before I move on to Khalid?
The comment I'll make, I'll acknowledge the person who has said it's a dream. What I was saying is a dream, it cannot be achieved. It cannot be achieved overnight. We have to remember, and this is why I said when I was talking about the social unrest, we have to remember the historical programming of the African continent, so that we have been literally emulating our masters and reproducing social injustices for our own people. So we need to have a very honest conversation as political leaders, and I'm sure if I was in particular in different countries, people would say that I'm dreaming, because the political leaders that we have are puppets, and I'll say that again, of the Western leaders. We need to delink, as Amin said, we need to delink from the Western way of being controlled with a remote control and literally focus on the people that are under us, and literally ask them, what is it that we can do, going back to the indigenous governance that looked at the welfare of the people, and then borrowing whatever is relevant to our contemporary times to address the social inequities that have existed since we got the political independence. It's a huge problem in Kenya.
I realize that.
Yeah, we have, in Africa, and we really, really have to look at ourselves and know that development, empowerment, economic empowerment, social empowerment cannot come from outside. It will come from us. And it will only come from us if our political leaders are prepared to tell the West, enough is enough. I know there are punishments that come with it when you tell the West enough is enough, and we have seen, for instance, the question of a place like Tanzania or Cuba or, different countries that I can name. So how do we do it It's a question we need to go back to our own selves, our own parliaments, and not just focus on aligning our pockets, because a lot of our political leaders do just that, align their pockets.
Thank you very much, Joki. I mean, the organizers are telling us we can go a bit longer than, the 1 hour, 30 minutes. But also at the same time, before I move really truly now to Khalid, there are, of course, spaces of good, positive work. You have done positive work in Kenya. Chizoba Imoka, who will be one of our panelists from Nigeria on Monday, has also done good work in Nigeria. Moyo Mutamba from Zimbabwe has also managed to. So there are pockets, but of course, we have to distinguish between the individual works that people do from the formal government projects. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Khalid, any comments about any of the questions or comments that I have read? I think we lost Professor Arar. We lost him.
Yeah.
I cannot see him here. No, Khalid, are you there? No, I think we lost Professor Arar. Okay, Francois, I'll move on to you.
Yeah, my comment is, first and foremost, when we, one thing that we are learning from the COVID experience is how deeply connected we are. And I think the COVID, if we take the COVID in a positive way, it definitely can bring a new ethical dimension of what we are living. That is, if I'm not responsible, I can harm the other. Okay, and this is very deep and very important. In fact, the crisis of COVID, much of the crisis of COVID as we lived it in Mediterranean and in Europe, for example, is for people not being responsible. And they started perpetuating, obviously, the disease around them, unfortunately. So, and this reality maybe will help us also to evaluate nationalism. I know that the question of nationalism was brought up. Nationalism for me is problem number one when it comes to migration, okay? And Europe is all the time kind of, in a way, both a victim but also perpetrator of nationalism. What is nationalism? Practically, nationalism is this myth that through which countries were united, okay? This myth that there is some sort of a one culture, one language, one sometimes even faith or religion, one race, the myth of all myths. So people following this kind of myth, then they started resisting diversity, resisting being explorative, and wandering, okay? My hope is this, that with the post-COVID reality, we'll start thinking beyond nationalism, okay? We'll start thinking beyond nationalism, and I hope we start doing this within educational practices, okay? And thinking beyond nationalism because we are connected, because the human being live in an ecosystem. We don't live in bubbles, okay? As maybe the myth of nationalism has perpetuated in our brains.
Okay, thank you. The organizers are telling me through app, of course, we have unfortunately lost Professor Arar. These things happen, power cuts, weak internet, and so on and so forth. So let me comment very briefly on the question, how different is social justice education from anti-racist education? And then, as a conclusion, I want to ask the two remaining panelists any reflection about what we have said about social justice and leadership and the way forward, keeping in mind the whole perspective of online teaching. And we will end with that, okay? So my reply to how different is social justice education from anti-racist education is the following. From my understanding, that is a robust notion of social justice, not a soft one, not a social justice that it focuses only on individual rights, following the Anglo-Saxon liberal tradition, but one that focuses on the values of community and the importance of all, and not just one individual in a very egotistic manner, capitalist manner. From that perspective of social justice, education, then you cannot truly achieve it without taking an anti-racist education perspective. Why? Because we know from many and many sociological studies done in the last 50 years that mainstream education is very racist. In all of the countries I have worked in, whether it is Canada, the United States, Ireland, Morocco, Malta, Middle East, everywhere, you know, there is a strong dosage of racism through different forms. The exclusion of certain pedagogies, the exclusion of certain capabilities of students, the exclusion of certain histories, the exclusion of certain literatures, the exclusion of whole peoples, as Professor Arar reminded us. So mainstream education, unfortunately, is quite racist. So if we truly focus on genuine social justice education, we have no choice morally but to be promoting anti-racist education. All right, back to the panelists, Joki and Francois. The whole issue of post-COVID, online learning, social justice, and leadership. Any comments on that? So we will end with this before I give over to Alex.
Okay, I can just add a little bit in terms of social justice, the difference between social justice and anti-racist education. You hit the nail on the head in terms of, because sometimes when we think of social justice and anti-racist education from the African context, we think we don't have to articulate anti-racism as part of the global South, but we look at it in terms of the education discourse, the way we were presented with education. It's a discriminate, because anti-racist pedagogy, anti-racist discourse brings in all the intersections of gender, race, class, and ethnicity, language, and so on and so forth. So when you're thinking of the global South, we didn't have to pay, what is it that we need to do to address issues of anti-racist education? It's not just a question of the North. And just to add on to what you said, Professor Portelli, social justice has been, the tendencies of social justice has been with that from the time of, time immemorial. And so it's not a new phenomenon. It's not a new paradigm. It's not anything new. And what we are doing as activists, as educators, is to rejuvenate, to have a renaissance of social justice, and to start asking ourselves deep questions. How can we make it more meaningful? Now, just to comment briefly on social justice in terms of leadership online teaching, as I said, somebody asked about the digital, how do the leaders, the educators in the, acquire digital knowledge? And I'll tell you, being in contact with some universities and schools in Kenya, it has been a challenge, because to connect digitally with your students, you have to have internet. You have to buy bundles, as they call them. You have to have data in your on your phone. And this is something that I'll say, from the Ministry of Education, maybe that's something to pay attention to. The second thing, in terms of living a little bit in terms of digital leadership, or how to acquire that, is to go back to our old ways of teaching. We have expansive space in Africa. We don't have to be in that classroom where you're all crowded. You can sit outside, you can sit under the tree and maintain the social distance and teach us that. We learned, growing up in Africa, we learned writing on the floor, writing on the ground. We can revisit those approaches of teaching. We don't have to be inside a classroom where we don't maintain the social distance. So we can technically overturn the online learning and go back to the traditional ways of teaching our children where the elders hand our own children being very, very creative, coming up with all kinds of creation by using the space that we have and maintaining the social distance. I hope it's something we can research on and see how effective that can be, getting the children out of the classroom into the spaces that we have and teaching from there.
Thank you very much, Oki. Francois, any further insights on this question?
Comments. First comment regarding the social justice and racism. Aristotle defines justice as giving what it is due. Social justice education is an education that seeks what it is due to the human being. Race, it is not due to the human being. Race is a colonial nationalistic ideal. So social justice education seeks to give what it is due to the human being by eliminating racism, by fighting against racism and recognizing the sovereignty of the human being. So that is, for me, social justice and regarding anti-racism. Then the other aspect, I want to end up with a dilemma. I know that many of us see the virtual as the online learning as some sort of alternative to the space, because we cannot be in a common space. Here, I think we have to be careful, John. We are forgetting that, unfortunately, not everywhere in the world has the beautiful spaces of Africa.
Joki is reminding us.
For the past year, teaching online was very painful for me. Seeing, for example, my students going to follow my classes in the car. Why? Because they're small, they're tiny apartment. It's not, the whole family are following online. Their kids, their spouses, themselves. So they end up literally either following on cell phones or mobiles or in the car or seeking other spaces. So I do believe that we have to be a little bit careful not to jump into the line online as some sort of a space solution. Online also necessitates space. Online necessitates also education. Not everyone has the means, or not everyone has also the knowledge and of using online learning. So I think a social justice education and more anarchic leadership is sensitive towards these needs. Online education can be a solution. In my view, it is a temporary solution, and I think COVID is showing us that we need to go a little bit beyond this. But at the same time, we have to be also well aware that people are suffering. People are suffering to follow an education. Because unfortunately, our system, our unjust system, we have people who live in huge villas, and we have others who live in pigeonholes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Francois. I think your point is well taken. It has, I mean, one among other things that needs to be considered. And yet, at the same time, were it not for online communications, we would not have been able to do this very session. And of course, you are not denying that, obviously. Okay, so first of all, I would like to truly thank the panelists. There has been a request. I emailed or texted the person for this request to email me, and I will then communicate with the three panelists, because there is someone who would like to invite us all for something else that they are doing. So I sent the email. I thank the audience. And once again, before I pass over to Alex, we have our third session on social justice and activism on Monday. You can check the time and the details on the webpage of 3CL and Call. And a reminder, the purpose of 3CL primarily is to create this kind of networking as an open, free, responsible space where we can help each other and move forward. Thank you. Alex.
Thanks, John. The difficulty I have during these sessions is to shut up and just listen, because there's too much which is of interest, and there's the urge to butt in. But like all of you, I'm learning quite a lot over here. When I saw the title for Distinct Leadership, I must say, coming from the kind of school of thought I'm in, it's a word which I find very difficult, because I am by nature somebody who is on the side of the learner, not of the institution. I have very little care for bricks and mortar education, I'm afraid, these days. And it's not because I'm not agreeing with what Francois is saying, but I happen to believe that at least technology got us through the pandemic. It doesn't mean it's been good education, it's been emergency education. It hasn't been online education. But in the same way that those of us who at least knew how to operate Zoom could at least get down to doing back to the business of education within 24 hours, I saw many esteemed professors who had no clue and spent about 6 months fighting the whole notion of even trying to engage with the students, and found it impossible, for instance, and had great crisis with the idea of examinations, because the idea of incarcerating people and getting them to, go through a one-size-fits-all regime, that's where they came from. So there's been some interesting things that I could hear. And the same thing is, I always remember, there's one time I organized a conference, John was there, when Malta had the presidency for the EU, about digital education. And the first thing the minister had said when he came on the podium was, and it was called the future of digital education. This guy walked on the podium and he said, I really don't care about digital education. I only care about good education. So sometimes I'm a bit uncomfortable with the idea of, the kind of labels that we're putting in with some of these things. John mentioned the whole thing about the 3CL. For those of you who don't know what it means, really, we've actually said it now means critical communication, connected learning, 3 C's and an L. And I think we're going to keep on beating the drum about this. I think the affordances of technology mean that this very valuable conversation means that we can share it eventually, that people who weren't here, the 50 people who are here, 47 now, okay, we can share it somewhere else with the permission of everybody. So I think that's something that we can keep on working on. But for me, I've learned a lot today. So thank you very much. As John said, the last session is next Monday. Please do join us. And there will be other conversations happening. If you want to join the community of practice that the 3CL is assembling around it globally, please do join us, drop us an email, join our newsletter. I mean, it's not, we're serious about this, okay? So
and
that's it.
The presentations will be available on video publicly and so on. Thank you very much, all. Thank you, Alex, Francois, Joki.
Thank you very much.
Is there from wherever you are. Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Welcome, and thank you again, John, for inviting me.
Thank you for the positive energy, all of you. All right. Bye-bye.
It was lovely. I enjoyed it.
Bye.
It was lovely.
Bye. Bye.